Tistou.
Tistou?
It is a rather peculiar name, isn't it?
Not the name of a saint or your next-door neighbour. Have you ever heard of the name?
No.
Oh, well. There once was a little boy whom everyone called Tistou. Tistou was actually supposed to be called François Baptiste, but since nobody had asked him what he thought of the name, he cried and cried at his own baptism, protesting until all the grown-ups found themselves unable to pronounce any other name than Tistou. This may go to show that grown-ups don't really know what our names are, any more than they pretend to know where we come from, why we are in the world, or what we are here to do in it. Tistou lived in a town called Mirepoix with Mr. Father, his father, and Mrs. Mother, his mother, in a magnificent, bright and beautiful house where everything was so well kept and shining. The house was surrounded by an enormous garden with beautiful trees, garages for the 9 exquisite cars, and stables for all the lovely horses, and a pony just about the same height as Tistou called Gymnastique, all of which made Tistou a very lucky and a very happy little boy. Mr. Father was tall and always well dressed. He had black, shiny hair, carefully smoothed with brilliantine. Mrs. Mother was slender and fair-haired. Her cheeks were soft as rose petals, and wherever she went there was a scent of flowers all around her. Tistou had wide blue eyes, fresh rosy cheeks, and fair and curly hair, and everyone who saw him exclaimed, "Oh, what a beautiful little boy!" This did not make Tistou conceited. Beauty seemed to him a perfectly natural quality. His parents were both very beautiful, and so he thought it was quite normal to be beautiful himself. Mirepoix was very much like any other town, yet it was known all over the world, for it was in Mirepoix that Mr. Father made guns and arms which were highly in demand. Mr. Father was an important manufacturer and often said, "Tistou, my boy, guns are not like umbrellas, which nobody wants when the sun is shining. Whatever the weather, guns sell and are a safe business." Mrs. Mother would tell him to "Eat up your soup, Tistou, for you must grow up big and strong so that one day you can take over the family business and be the master of Mirepoix. Making guns is a very tiring thing to do." And so Tistou, who was a good boy, sat up and did as he was told and ate his soup. Mrs. Mother had, until his 8th birthday, taught Tistou the basics of how to read, write, and do some simple arithmetics, and had preferred to start off her son's education at home. On his 8th birthday, she concluded that she had completed her task, and Tistou was now ready to start school. So off he went. And yet, alas, alas, school had an unforeseen and disastrous effect on Tistou. The long line of letters began to stride across the blackboard. The long chains of the multiplication began to unroll themselves link by link with the 3 times 3, the 5 times 5, the 7 times 7, and the... Oh, Tistou soon fell sound asleep. And yet he was not stupid, or lazy, or even tired. "I won't go to sleep, I won't go to sleep," Tistou said to himself. But really, there was nothing to be done. The schoolmaster's voice was like a lullaby. The blackboard turned as dark as night, and the ceiling seemed to whisper to him, "Psst, psst, happy dreams, Tistou." On the 3rd day, the schoolmaster gave up and gave Tistou a letter to pass on to his parents that said, "Sir, your son is not like other children. We cannot keep him here." Worries are a form of sorrow. They can bother you from the moment you wake up. They will hover among the leaves in the wind, travel on birdsong, creep along windowsills, seep up through the floorboards, slip into the room when you're not looking. This morning, the worries in the shining house were called not like other children. Worries are often happiest when they are noticed, and so, as if a siren blasted out, "Not like other children!" The shining house was full of worries. Even the sun was reluctant to rise. Amelia, the cook, mumbled to herself as she lit the stove. "Ah, Tistou, not like other children. I've never heard such nonsense. He's got 2 arms and 2 legs, hasn't he?" And Carolus, the butler, who was polishing the banister to perfection, said, "Tistou, not like other children. Just let them come and say that to my face. I'll show them." And in the stables, the stable boys whispered to each other, "Not like other children? Really? A nice boy like that? Really? I don't believe it." Naturally, the most worried of all were Tistou's parents. "Here is a boy," thought Mr. Father, "who is more difficult to make something out of than one of my cannonballs." Mrs. Mother let a teardrop fall into her morning coffee. If he falls asleep in the classroom at school, how will he ever learn anything? Perhaps distraction is not without a cure, Mr. Father pointed out. Yes, let's hope so. And daydreaming is undoubtedly less dangerous than bronchitis, replied Mrs. Mother. Mr. Father, who was a man of quick and bold decisions, suddenly exclaimed, "I've got it! It's quite simple. Tistou learns nothing at school, therefore he shall not go to school. Let him learn everything that is necessary by experiencing it directly. Life is, after all, the best school there is." Mrs. Mother enthusiastically approved Mr. Father's decision, and so the sun began to shine again, and all the worries about not being like other children disappeared. The first day of Mr. Father's new educational system was to be gardening. "The earth is the origin and basis of everything," he said. As Tistou went into his first lesson, he just hoped to goodness he wouldn't fall asleep again. The gardener, Mr. Moustache, awaited him in the greenhouse. Mr. Moustache was an old man. He talked little and appeared to prefer plants to people. He had, how can I describe Moustache's moustache? An extraordinary thicket, white as snow, growing right under his nose. It really was one of nature's true wonders. "Good morning, Mr. Moustache," said Tistou politely, raising his hat.
"Ah, there you are, Tistou. Let's see what you'll be up to. Here's a heap of earth. Make a hole in the middle with your thumbs and arrange the pots in a line along the wall. When that is done, we'll put suitable seeds in the holes."
Tistou started carrying out the task Mr. Moustache had asked him to do, and was pleasantly surprised that this form of work did not send him to sleep. On the contrary, he enjoyed it. The soil smelled so nice, so Tistou continued his work with great care and determination. Moustache was walking slowly around the garden. It was then that Tistou discovered why Mr. Moustache spoke so little to people. He preferred talking to flowers. Moustache walked from flower to flower, asking them how they were. As soon as Tistou had finished, he went to meet Mr. Moustache at the other end of the garden. "There, I finished."
"Good. Well, let's have a look at what you've done, shall we?" said
the gardener, and they returned to the greenhouse, Moustache not being able to resist the opportunity to congratulate a peony on its complexion or encourage a hydrangea to turn blue. All of a sudden, they both stopped.
"What on earth? Am I dreaming?
Asked Mr. Moustache in utter amazement as he rubbed his eyes.
Are you seeing what I'm seeing?
Yes, I am, answered Tistou. Under the wall, just a few yards away, every pot Tistou had filled had flowered in 5 minutes. A miracle is a miracle. First you establish its undeniable existence, and then you go on to try to explain it. But we didn't put any seeds in the pots, Mr. Moustache, so where do the flowers come from?
Most mysterious,
said Moustache.
Very mysterious indeed.
And then he suddenly took Tistou's little hands in his own and said,
Show me your thumbs. My boy, something astonishing, extraordinary and rare has happened to you. You've got green thumbs.
Green? Well, they look pink to me and admittedly rather dirty, but certainly not green.
You can't see it, of course. Green thumbs are invisible. It's something that happens under the skin, what's known as hidden talent. Only an expert can recognize it. Well, I'm an expert, and I tell you, you've got green thumbs.
What do you do with green thumbs?
Oh, they're wonderful things. A true gift of heaven. You see, they're seeds everywhere, not only in the earth, but on the roofs of houses, on window ledges, on pavements, fences and walls, hundreds of millions of seeds which come to nothing. There they are, waiting for a puff of wind to blow them into a garden or field. Oh, they often die caught between 2 stones without a chance of ever becoming flowers. But if a green thumb touches them, wherever it may be, they immediately start to grow and flower.
Tistou did not seem to be very happy about this. Oh, they'll just say I'm not like other people again.
Yeah, you better not tell anyone about it. What's the use of merely making people curious or jealous? Hidden talent often leads to trouble. You've got green thumbs, and that's a fact, but keep it to yourself, and it will be our secret.
And in the notebook provided by Mr. Father, which Tistou had to get signed at the end of every lesson, Moustache wrote,
The boy shows promise as a gardener.
Next day, he had a lesson with Mr. Turnbull, who was Mr. Father's most trusted employee. Every morning, he was in charge of counting every employee to make sure none of them were missing. Every afternoon, he looked through the barrels of the guns to make sure they were perfectly straight. And every evening, he made sure all the doors were properly locked.
Today's lesson is about law and order,
Mr. Turnbull proclaimed, as if he were addressing an entire regiment. Mr. Turnbull had been in the army before he had taken to manufacturing guns, and he did always seem on guard and on the verge of exploding.
Let's walk into town,
said Mr. Turnbull.
A town consists, as you can see, of streets, monuments, houses, and the people who live in the houses. What, in your opinion, Tistou, is the most important thing in a town?
The botanical gardens.
Not at all! The most important thing in a town is order. Without order, a town, a country, a whole society would be spineless. Order is essential, and in order to maintain it, disorder must be punished. What happens to people who create disorder? We put them in prison, right here.
And he showed Tistou the high wall with the black iron gate and all the terrible spikes. What good are all those spikes?
They're to stop the prisoners from escaping.
If the prison weren't so ugly, perhaps they wouldn't want to escape.
What an odd child,
thought Mr. Turnbull.
You need to know, Tistou, that a prisoner is a wicked man.
And so they put him in there to cure him of his wickedness?
One tries to teach him to live without stealing or killing people.
Surely he'd learn much quicker if the prison weren't so ugly. Tistou felt like crying and was silent during the whole walk home. Mr. Turnbull interpreted his silence as a good sign and thought that the lesson on order had borne fruit. All the same, he wrote in Tistou's report book,
"The boy needs watching closely. He asks too many questions."
That night, after his lesson on order, he had a nightmare. Some say dreams are only dreams and their importance should not be exaggerated, but one can't stop oneself from dreaming. It is true that Tistou asked many questions, and he kept asking them even though he was asleep, and so when he woke up he was startled and his heart was pounding. Why should the prisons be made to look so ugly? The prisoners won't become any better for it. I know quite well that if I were locked up inside there, even if I had done nothing wrong, I should most certainly become very wicked indeed. What can be done to make them less unhappy? Suddenly an idea began to rummage in his head. Suppose the poor prisoners were surrounded with flowers. Perhaps they would become better. Supposing I tried my green thumbs. I shall have to do it alone without anyone knowing. Tistou could not go to sleep again until he had carried out his plan. So he got out of bed and sneaked out of his room. Protected by the moon, for the moon is always kind to people who go for a walk in the middle of the night, and the stars, for the moon had quickly sent a message to the stars asking them to twinkle as brightly as they could and keep an eye on the little boy. Tistou was naturally slightly nervous. Would his thumbs be as green as he had been told by Moustache? He went all the way to the prison, and there he stroked and rubbed his hands wherever he could, along the walls, in the smallest cracks between the bricks, on the gates and even the keyholes. When all had been touched, he ran home and went to sleep peacefully. Next morning, goodness me! What had happened to the prison? Imagine the bewilderment of the whole town. Imagine the astonishment of the people when they saw their prison transformed into a castle of flowers, into a place of marvels. The high wall was covered with roses. In fact, every window in the prison, every bar had received its share of flowers. Creepers climbed and clung and hung down, and the horrid spikes on the walls had been replaced by cacti. No one could explain the miracle. No one, except, of course, Moustache. So Tistou went to see him.
"Oh, there you are. Not bad. Not bad at all. Oh, that was a great beginning. Now, remember not to overuse the honeysuckle and beware of Aristochia. It's a fast-growing creeper, but its leaves are dark. Perhaps a bit more morning glory, huh? It'll be uplifting."
Thus, Moustache became Tistou's secret advisor. Grown-ups have an extraordinary mania for trying to explain the inexplicable. Whenever anything surprises them, they get fidgety. If something new happens in the world, they become determined to prove that this new thing resembles something they knew all about already. The mystery of Mirepoix prison gave the grown-ups a splendid opportunity of getting excited and then calling in experts of the kind called botanists. Botanists are people who busy themselves cutting up flowers and then giving them unpronounceable names. As you can imagine, that requires a great deal of study. The astonishment and excitement of the botanists was nothing in comparison to what the prisoners felt. Since the prisoners were no longer aware of the bars at the windows of their cells, nor the barbed wire and spikes on the walls, they forgot their longing to escape. Even the most surly forgot to swear. The wickedest forgot to get angry and fight. Even those who were due to be released refused to go, for they had acquired a taste for gardening. The Mirepoix prison got renowned all over the world as the perfect model of a prison. No one was more delighted than Tistou, and, well, he wanted to share his triumph with someone, even though it was a secret. So he went to see his pony Gymnastique, and whispered into his soft, furry ears. Gymnastique, listen carefully and don't tell anyone. Gymnastique pricked an ear. I have discovered a most extraordinary thing. Flowers can prevent evil things from happening. And now, on to Tistou's further education. I think the time has now come to show Tistou what poverty is, said Mr. Father. And afterwards he should be taught what illness means, said Mrs. Mother, so he may learn to take proper care of his health. I suggest we let Mr. Turnbull give him a lesson on poverty. His lesson on order was admirable. And thus Mr. Turnbull explained and showed Tistou around the slums on the edge of the town. The sight was far worse than any prison. Narrow, muddy, evil-smelling streets, with hovels which were so ruinous it was a wonder they stood up at all. Right next to the wealthy part of the town, the slum appeared shameful, with no street lamps, no pavements, no shops. Tistou was already rubbing his thumbs. A little grass would harden the mud and make these streets a great deal more pleasant to walk on. Plenty of morning glory, mingled with clematis, will hold the hovels together, he thought as he touched all the hideous things he saw. The hovels were overcrowded, and the inhabitants looked very unhealthy. Living huddled together like that without light, they naturally turned pale like the endive Moustache grew in the cellar. I'm sure I would be pale and miserable if I were treated like an endive. Tistou decided to grow geraniums along the window ledges so that the children might at least have a little colour to look at. But why do all these people live in these rabbit hutches?
Because they haven't got proper houses to live in, of course. What a stupid question.
But why haven't they got proper houses?
Because they haven't got any work.
Why haven't they got any work?
Because they've got no luck.
So they haven't got anything at all?
That's what real poverty is, Tistou.
At least they'll have a few flowers tomorrow, Tistou said to himself.
Now, let's get on with our lesson. What is required to control poverty and its deplorable consequences? Let's think a little. Something beginning with O.
Oh, I know. Oceans of money.
Oh, certainly not. It's order that's required.
Tistou kept quiet all the way home and asked no more questions. The following day, you may have guessed it already, the Mirepoix newspaper announced that morning glories, clematis, geraniums had made an overwhelming invasion in the slum quarters, and the streets were no longer covered in mud, but in beautiful green grass. This underprivileged district, which people had avoided because it was so horrible to look at, had become the most beautiful in the whole town. Now they would visit it as if it were a museum. People who were living there could profit from all this, and soon this quarter started to flourish, enabling new jobs and living conditions they had not even been able to imagine. Moustache congratulated Tistou.
Oh, Tistou, you've made a first-class job of the slums. It only needs a bit of a pleasant scent. Next time, how about using some jasmine? Oh, it's a quick climber and it smells good.
Tistou promised to do better next time.